Welcome to a deep dive, you guys, into the power of the mind. Not just, as some abstract concept, but how you can actually tap into it and use it. We're diving into some really fascinating stuff today, stuff that you provided, by the way. We've got two sources to unpack. One is a deep dive into Western philosophy's take on the self, and the other is about the sheer power of your mind.
It's actually pretty remarkable when you think about it, how ancient philosophers and, modern neuroscientists, they all seem to be converging on this idea that really understanding your mind is key to, well, a more fulfilling life. It's like they're all saying the same thing, just in, different ways.
Totally. It's wild. And speaking of, way back when, let's kick things off with this philosophy source. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that, thousands of years ago, people were already, wrestling with the same questions we have today,
hmm
like Socrates and his whole know thyself challenge.
Oh, absolutely. And that challenge is still so incredibly relevant today, isn't it? I mean, it's not just about, navel gazing or whatever, but about self-awareness as a tool, right?
Yeah.
Because when we understand our motivations, our weaknesses even, we can make choices that are more aligned with what we actually value. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's true. It's like having an instruction manual for your mind, but, way more interesting than that sounds.
Definitely more interesting.
And speaking of fascinating minds, we got to talk about, the big names, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
hmm
I mean, these guys, they each had their own, unique take on what the self actually is, and how it develops, which I think is super relevant to what we're talking about. Like, did you know that Plato, he believed in this, get this, three-part soul: reason, physical appetite, and spirit.
Oh, yeah, the three-part soul, classic Plato.
It's wild. Makes you wonder, which one's calling the shots in your life right now, right?
That's the question, right? I mean, are you driven by logic, your desires, your passions, and how did that impact your everyday decisions, right?
Mhm.
Understanding this, your own internal landscape can be incredibly revealing.
For sure. And it's not just them. It's like these philosophers, they were onto something, right? Because here we are, centuries later, still grappling with these same fundamental questions about who we are and what it all means. But, the story doesn't end in ancient Greece. As we move through history, we see how these perspectives on the self evolve.
Yeah, it's a journey, for sure.
During the medieval period, things shifted to a more God-centric view. Thinkers like St. Augustine, I'm sure you've heard of him, he kind of blended Plato's ideas with Christian beliefs. It was all about the soul's journey toward the divine.
Oh, absolutely. It was a stark contrast to the human-centered approach of ancient Greeks, wasn't it? But then, boom, the Renaissance happens. Suddenly, the individual is back in the spotlight, right? Human potential, reason, all that jazz. And that leads us nicely to the modern era, which, let's be honest, is kind of like a philosophical buffet when it comes to the mind.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's almost overwhelming. It's like every philosopher had their own take on who we are and how our minds work. Descartes, Locke, Hume, where do you even begin, right?
Yeah.
So to navigate this buffet, let's try to highlight a few key figures, ones who really had a huge impact on how we understand the self even today.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
So first up, we've got René Descartes, famous for his declaration, I think, therefore I am.
Ugh, Descartes. A classic. His focus on self-awareness as the foundation of identity is honestly incredibly powerful. The ability to think, to question, to doubt, that's what he saw as the very essence of existing, of being human.
It makes you think, right? Yeah, then there's John Locke. He argued that, we're shaped by our experiences, which makes a lot of sense, right? Our past experiences are constantly writing the story of our present selves.
It's true. I mean, it makes you think about the impact of everything we've gone through, all those, defining moments that have shaped us into who we are today. It's quite a thought, isn't it?
It really is. It's a good reminder that, we're not just these static beings. We're constantly changing, evolving in response to our environment and our experiences. Okay, but get ready for this. Now we come to David Hume, and he basically drops a philosophical bomb by saying, are you ready for this?
Wow.
Hold up, there's no self at all.
You think Descartes and Locke were radical?
I know. It's like, whoa.
Right. He really throws a wrench in the works.
Totally. He believed that what we see as the self is really just a constantly shifting collection of thoughts and perceptions. It's wild.
It's a radical idea for sure. It challenges this whole notion we have of a fixed identity, but I think this is important. It also forces us to really examine what we mean when we talk about the self. What does that even mean?
Exactly. So you've got Descartes saying, your thinking defines you. Locke pointing to the power of your experiences, and Hume basically questioning the whole idea of a fixed self. It makes you wonder, like, what's the takeaway? How much control do we actually have over who we are?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a question that has, like, puzzled philosophers for centuries. But honestly, instead of getting stuck in that, philosophical debate, I think it's more interesting and probably more productive to explore what's actually happening in our brains when we think about these things. That's where neuroscience comes in.
And that is the perfect bridge to our next section, where we'll do exactly that, explore the amazing world of your brain, its power, its potential, and most importantly, how you can tap into it like never before. So stick around, folks. We'll be right back after a quick break. All right, so we're back and ready to dive into the world of neuroscience. This is where things get really interesting, I think, because we're talking about, mind power. I mean, it sounds kind of like a superhero movie, right?
Hmm.
But it's actually some pretty fascinating stuff.
Right. Who needs superheroes when you've got your brain?
Yeah,
Right there.
exactly. Okay, but seriously, what exactly is mind power? What are we even talking about here?
Well, I mean, it's not about, like, bending spoons with your thoughts or anything like that, although that would be pretty cool.
Right. Sign me up for that.
Uh, but really, it's about recognizing the incredible power that our brains have to literally shape our reality. And we're not even exaggerating here. It's about focused attention, about visualization, about choosing beliefs that empower you rather than hold you back.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like we have all this potential just waiting to be unlocked, and it all comes down to our minds.
Exactly. It's
Well,
like having a superpower we never knew we had.
yeah.
The more we understand how our brains work, the more we can tap into that power. Our source mentions the whole, left brain versus right brain thing, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like a tale as old as time, right?
Hmm.
But what's the deal with those two hemispheres anyway? Is it really as simple as, like, one side being the logical side and the other being the creative side?
Well, it's not quite that black and white. It's not like one side is better or that we only use one side at a time or anything. It's more nuanced than that.
So it's not like a light switch.
Exactly. It's more like, different strengths, different tendencies. Your left brain, it tends to be more logical, more analytical, more detail-oriented. It loves lists, structure, breaking things down step by step, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So that's the planner, the organizer.
Exactly. Then you've got your right brain, which is more visual, intuitive, creative. It sees the big picture, thrives on imagination.
Yeah.
It's more in tune with emotions.
Okay, so if my left brain is making the to-do list, my right brain is designing it.
There you go. And while we use both sides, of course, understanding which one you naturally lean towards, that can be huge.
Totally. So how do we, like, actually use this information? How can we tap into both sides,
Mm.
especially when it comes to, like, learning new things?
Well, our source talks about something called mind mapping, which is super
Oh,
interesting.
I've heard of that. It's like you draw a web, right,
Yeah.
with all your ideas.
Exactly. It's basically visual organization, right? You're
Yeah.
organizing information around a central concept. You connect ideas with lines, arrows, symbols, colors, images, whatever works for you. It's like creating a visual map of your thoughts.
And that helps you learn.
Totally. It helps you see connections that you might not have noticed otherwise.
It's funny because I actually tried mind mapping a while back. It was for this project at work, and honestly, I was surprised by how much it actually helped.
Right. A lot of people find it really helpful, and it's something you can do by hand or, use one of those digital tools.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I was going to ask about that, actually. Like, is one way better than the other, pen and paper versus, like, an app or something?
That's a good question. And there are definitely pros and cons to both. Our source actually highlights how hand-drawn mind maps can be incredibly freeing, which I thought was interesting
Yeah.
because you're physically drawing, scribbling, connecting those neurons. It's very tactile.
Right, you're using a different part of your brain.
Exactly. And that can really spark a lot of creativity. And let's be honest, sometimes there's just something satisfying about, seeing your ideas come to life on paper.
Totally. No need to worry about finding the right button to click for the perfect branch shape.
Huh. Exactly. On the other hand, though, digital mind mapping tools, they offer a lot of flexibility. You can rearrange elements effortlessly, add links, even collaborate with other people. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's true. Technology can be pretty awesome when it comes to, like, organizing and connecting ideas.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of connecting, our source also mentions specific learning techniques for left brain and right brain dominant individuals. We kind of touched on this earlier, but it's worth exploring a little deeper.
Yeah, definitely. So let's say, for example, you're someone who's more left-brained. What are some learning techniques that might be particularly helpful?
Well, if you're more left-brained, more logical, traditional methods like outlining, note-taking, breaking down information into like sequential steps, that might feel really natural to you. You're all about that clear, structured approach.
Right, which makes sense. But what if you're more right-brained? Does that mean you're destined to doodle through every lecture?
Not at all. Right brain learners, they often benefit from techniques that, engage their visual and emotional sides a bit more. Think flashcards with images, creating diagrams, maybe even role playing to really bring information to life.
Interesting. So it's not really about one being better than the other, but about finding what works best for you. Like what actually resonates with the way your brain is wired.
Precisely. The key here is to be open to experimenting, to discovering the methods that make you feel, I don't know, the most engaged, the most excited to learn.
Learning should be fun.
Absolutely. It shouldn't feel like a chore. It should feel like an adventure.
I love that. An adventure for the mind. And this deep dive, I mean, it's definitely been an adventure so far, hasn't it? I mean, we've got from like the ancient philosophers to the inner workings of the brain. It's kind of amazing how it all connects, you know?
I know, right? And that connection, it really speaks to something fundamental about our desire to understand ourselves.
You know, it's really kind of wild when you think about it. We've got these two sources, one like ancient philosophy, the other, all about the brain and how it works. And they both basically point to the same thing. Our minds are incredibly powerful.
It really is remarkable and makes you realize that this whole question of the self, the mind, it's not just some abstract philosophical debate. It's about as relevant as it gets.
Totally. And the takeaway, it seems, is that we've got this amazing tool, our minds, and now it's up to us to learn how to actually use it.
Exactly. And the exciting part is that we can. We're not just along for the ride.
Right. It's not predetermined.
Exactly. We have the ability to observe our thoughts, right? To step back and say, okay, is this thought helpful? Is it serving me? And if not, we can choose a different one.
It's like we have more control than we realize, right?
Absolutely. We can't always control what pops into our heads. That's true. But we can decide which thoughts we're going to buy into, which ones we're going to let go of.
And which ones we use to, fuel our actions.
Exactly. And the more we practice that, the more we step into this power we have to create the reality we want. Okay, but that sounds kind of, I don't know, woo-woo.
Right.
We're not saying that you can just, manifest whatever you want just by thinking about it, are we?
No, not at all. It's not about pretending that everything is perfect or anything like that. It's more about, I guess, approaching life with more intention, more awareness.
So it's more about, having the self-awareness to see our patterns, see how our thoughts are playing out, and then make a choice about how we're going to respond.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. If it's true, and I believe it is, that our thoughts can shape our reality, then the question becomes, what kind of reality are you creating right now with your thoughts?
Whoa.
Right. I mean, are you focusing on possibilities or limitations? Are you caught in fear, or are you choosing courage?
That's a powerful question. It's kind of like you're responsible for your own reality. In a way, yes. But that's also incredibly empowering, don't you think?
It is. And I think that's something that both of these sources really highlight, that we have this incredible power within us, and it all starts with understanding our own minds.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you with one final thought, if I may.
Of course.
It's this. The next time you find yourself spiraling, caught in those negative thought loops, remember this conversation. Remember that you have the power to shift your focus, to choose a more empowering thought.
To choose a different path.
Exactly. The power is yours. Use it wisely.
Love it. Okay, folks, that's a wrap on this deep dive into the power of the mind. We hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to join us next time for another fascinating exploration.